Fantastic. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the April 27th council briefing. We have a handful of items to go over with council tonight. You probably received some of the information in advance of tonight's briefing. A couple of months ago, there were a handful of items that council asked staff to look into, and the bulk of those were associated with parks and recreation. There were a total of 4 items you wanted us to take a look at. First was potential relocation of the Veterans Memorial. The second was having the city become a Purple Heart designation. The third was the lighting at the dog park, particularly in the evening hours and early morning hours. And the final one was a park assessment. 3 of those 4 items are ready to be discussed with council based on work that Jason Fatides and his staff have done at this point in time. So we'd like to tackle those first 3 tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Jacob to talk about Jason to talk about the first one, the relocation of the Veterans Memorial. This is something that he and his staff, I think, did a pretty good job on identifying what the viable locations are within the city for relocation, with an estimated cost of between $60,000 and $80,000 per location, and they can discuss those options with council. Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
So good evening, council. If you don't mind, I'm going to turn over the relocation of the memorial to Trevor, and then we'll talk about the Purple Heart designation, and then after that, the dog park. So over to you, Trevor.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Taking a look at the relocation for Memorial Park, the first thing we did was reach out to our VFW and our American Legion, and both of them were in favor of us moving and well supporting and behind us. So we went around our parks and looked at areas we thought that would provide some parking, would provide the serenity and kind of the mood that we felt like would be wanted at a Veterans Memorial. The first picture here, this is a picture of Rotary Park, which is over by the boat ramp. And, oh, it disappeared. You can see that park, it's kind of out of the way. It does have limited parking. If that's an area that we'd like to consider, we would probably have to add some irrigation or do a couple upgrades. We just thought that would be a nice spot. You could go to the next one, Jacob. Gonzales Park. This was an area that we felt kind of really wasn't utilized. It would give us an area to do a really nice park, really nice memorial. However, you'll see when we do roll out our parks assessment, this is an area that we really feel like this park could really be revamped and really be the premier park on the north end of the city. So we were kind of holding this spot unless you guys were really just in favor of it. The next one, Huguenot Park. So this area that you see circled is kind of right behind the senior building. Again, it's an area that's not really utilized a whole lot at this moment. There is some parking there, and we thought that could be a good application. You can go to the next one, Jacob. The golf course. This is an area that I've been looking at. You know, our ultimate goal at the golf course would be to somehow to have a multi-purpose facility. And there's an area here circled that's safe, completely out of play, and you could get to it without disrupting play. It's a spot that really could be a nice sitting area, a nice garden, a nice memorial area. Just another one to take a look at. But our favorite and the area that we'd really like to come through would be Oceanfront Park. You can see it this circled in. It's at the northeast corner of the park. Just thought that would give the setting. It has the parking. It has the green space. Even though this photo, the grass isn't where it needs to be, it will be soon. This is kind of the area we would like to focus on, and we'd like to kind of look to your direction and see what input you guys have and which park you'd like us to really look at so we could get into the details a little deeper. If you have any questions, it's kind of those are the options we have at this time.
Does council have any thoughts or comments on the locations proposed?
I like the staff's idea of the Oceanfront Park. You got most of the bases covered there. Huguenot, that area that you designated is primarily a dog walker area. People are going in there and there's dog poop everywhere. I think the Rotary Park near 2nd Avenue, it'd be pretty tough to find parking for people. So I really like the Oceanfront Park idea myself.
This is Sandy Golding. I concur. I like the Oceanfront Park as well. And I agree with the staff that I would really like to see us save the Gonzales Park space for something that we could do a little bit more to revitalize that park, because I think it could use it. So this would definitely be the Oceanfront Park space. I think would be great, especially because of the accessibility and the parking. And I just think it's a really nice location.
I agree. I think of the proposed, I don't understand how the golf course would work at all. How would they access visiting that memorial area? Would it have to be on a golf cart?
Actually, the area that we proposed, it's really right behind what we call the chipping green. It really is a short walk. It is accessible. But you would have to, there is play on the golf course and you would have to navigate it, but there is a routing where we could not disrupt play and get to it.
And then my other question, I might just be making more work for myself. Do we know the history of the name Huguenot? Is it named after, I mean, I'm sure it's named after someone important to our city's history, but was it, some of the parks like in Atlantic Beach, for example, are named after war veterans. So I'm just curious if that might have been, have we done that research that there might be a tie-in?
Wasn't it for the French Huguenots that were here?
I don't know.
Well, park staff have not done that study, Ms. Hoffman, but we will look into it.
Okay, and that would just be a consideration, not a determining factor, but I would be fine with the Oceanfront Park location if all else stays equal.
This is Corey Nichols. I mean, I like the Oceanfront Park as well. The only issue I would have there is just at a memorial park, you know, the golf course, like Trevor said, it's a place that they could reflect in a quieter environment, because that area of the beach park does get, you know, there's times where there's a decent amount of people there. Obviously, you remember the Pokemon craziness that went on there. There are some dance groups that go out there in that particular area and do dance classes. And, you know, I mean, you know, I think it's a fine location. You know, most of those parks I've always seen in more places where people can reflect on the loss of life and stuff in that area. I mean, I'm not opposed to the Oceanfront Park. That's my only thought about that location, that it's not as solemn of a and quiet of a place. And unfortunately, there's a lot of dog poop there as well.
Also, did you guys give thought to the history park at the Beaches Museum?
No, we had not considered that.
I mean, city property, just throwing it out there that might even be, it's alongside Beach Boulevard, but we certainly have parking. It would certainly be relative, or, you know, relevant to the property. So.
And I like for people driving in being able to see the American flag, and people driving by being able to see it. It seems like it's kind of tucked away in some of those other places as well.
I like the idea of the Beaches History Park. I think that because part of it, I mean, I know we want it to be a solemn location, but also too, I think we want it to be someplace that's easily accessible, because I think we want people to see it and we want people to stop there and spend some time reflecting. If it were tucked away somewhere and people don't know about it, then they may not, you know, know that they can go there and do that.
Again, we're open to suggestions from council, from the public. We want to find the best location. So if we put our heads together, I'm sure we'll come up with it.
The only other thing I'm going to throw in there as the last consideration is, I don't know if any of you guys have been to Normandy, but the majestic ocean crashing as you're sitting there looking at things, it was absolutely breathtaking. So, you know, you're right, there might be some Pokemon type things going on with kids and whatnot, but I think generally speaking, the feeling of that ocean crashing as you sit and reflect about your lost loved one is pretty nice.
Chris, do you have any thoughts on any particular space there?
Yeah, we have, and I can do a walkthrough with Parks and Rec if you guys want to, but I mean, my first thought would be west of the chapel in what we call the wedge, that there's nothing else there. And there's access to it from the, there's a gate from Pablo Avenue. So, I mean, I'm just throwing it out there. It seems like it would be completely appropriate to do something like that there, but you know, we have to do what's best for the, I mean, the location of it now. Any of these will be an improvement, a vast improvement of where it is now. So,
Right.
but I definitely would suggest we at least see if this is a viable option.
Okay, is that it for the Veterans Memorial?
Yes, that's it. We will do our due diligence, look at those couple other parks, and we'll get back with you.
So
Thank
yeah,
you. Appreciate it. Good job.
sounds like the two predominant options for council are going to be Oceanfront Park and to also take a look at Beaches Museum Park as well. And we can work up more details on both of those and bring them back to council for final consideration. With that, Jason, you want to move on to item number 2, Purple Heart designation?
Certainly. So we did meet with the commanders of both the VFW and the American Legion. And we also spoke with the Memorial Order of Purple Heart guys about the designation of Purple Heart City. In meeting with them, we also discussed the relocation of the memorial, and all organizations were very happy to see that we would prefer to move it to a more serene, apt place. As far as the designation of the Purple Heart City goes, I know Council's probably aware that Neptune Beach, Atlantic Beach, the city of Jacksonville, and Duval County are all Purple Heart cities and county. And so I think it's fitting that we would want to join them. Mayor had asked about the process, a very simple process. It is drawing up a proclamation that is satisfactory to the Purple Heart Order. And it's simply that. We would advertise it, give them enough time so that they can promote it to the media. And that's pretty much it. As far as signage goes, they would be prepared to take up, the onus on that. In our discussions with them, we thought that, if we could choose the relocation of the memorial and coincide the designation on the same day, that would give us some good media coverage and so forth. August 7th is Purple Heart Day in the state of Florida. And, if we can get that to coincide, happens to be on a Friday, it would, I think, further promote the process. And that's pretty much it. I mean, any questions, we're available.
I think when we looked at this a couple of years ago, we didn't want it to be just throwing up a sign. We wanted it to be something a ceremony of honor. And so one of the things that we need to talk about is the potential of bringing in an honor guard from the military, maybe the small Navy band that can play the Navy hymnal type music or the ceremonial type music as well. But my big thought about this has always been, if we're going to do it, let's do this right, because it's a very important distinction for people who've won that award to be honored by their hometown. So, rather than just throw up a sign and do a proclamation, I'll work with Mike, with your permission, I'll work with you, or I'll work with Jason to get the contacts in the military and get the appropriate honor guards and whatnot out here.
Absolutely.
Do we know how many Purple Heart recipients there are in Jacksonville Beach?
I don't know that, no.
I have no idea.
The finance officer for the Memorial Order of the Purple Heart is a Jacks Beach local who went to Fletcher. The other thing, Mayor, that both organizations were very thrilled about the idea and offered to, make the barbecue and participate in the ceremony and, like you say, do it right and, be a part of something good.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll touch base with Mike and we'll figure out how to move forward with the Navy relationship, the joint service relationship, and start to put together a plan.
So can I ask a question? Would the Purple Heart organization make sure that Purple Heart recipients are invited to the event?
Absolutely. That was one of the, shouldn't say conditions, one of the agreements, that they would have enough time to promote it and invite the people from their organization.
I think August 7th would be ideal if we can make it all work out that way.
And if we couldn't move the memorial in time, Mayor, we talked about just having a groundbreaking, event with the barbecue and other type of publicity and media there.
Yeah, that'd be great. Good. Sounds good, Jason. Thank you.
Jason, you can just keep rolling into item number 3 with regard to the dog park.
Thank you, Mike. So council should have received a package that was kind of the summary of our survey. I'm just going to touch on a few points that, kind of jumped out at me, and feel free to, ask any question anytime. So we sent the survey out to about 600 or so members that we had emails addresses for. And I think we got a fairly decent response in about 16% or 99 responses. What jumped out at me was that 60% of our members are visiting the park either daily or a few times a week. Second question wasn't really a surprise. The busy times are 8 to 12 in the morning, and then again 3 to 6 in the afternoon. Question 3 was where we spent a lot of our time, trying to dig in to find out what it is that, we could do to, make it more appealing. And if you look at question 3, pretty much asks, how satisfied are you with the park? 1 being dissatisfied and 5 being very satisfied. And if you look at the answers, you had 6 people answered 1. Now, of those 6, I've got to point out that 2 of them, I think, got the scoring backwards, because one said it's a very nice park and gave it a 1. And another said, I love the park, but didn't rejoin this year because our son moved away and took the dog. So really that's 4 ones. If you look at the 1, 2, and 3 scores, most of those people visit the park less than once a month. And almost all of those people or those members attend the small dog park. So, really, it didn't really tell us anything new. We do realize that, if we're going to upgrade, we've got to focus more attention on the small park rather than the larger park. Not to say that we don't give the large park any attention, though. And a couple of things jumped out about the smaller park is people were dissatisfied that we didn't have the same turf in the small park as we have in the larger dog park. Couple of years ago, we had a lot of problems with sand spurs there. We've worked to mitigate that. It's not something that we can get rid of overnight. It takes a couple of seasons to do that. We think we're well on our way. With Trevor Hughes on board now, we are going to look at enhancing the agronomic aspect of all our parks, something that will come up in the parks assessment that hopefully we're going to present to council soon in the near future. And so one of the things Trevor and his staff are going to do is to put an irrigation system in there and upgrade the turf. Other than that, I think the results overall were favorable. We did take note of the suggestions, more shade, some amenities for the dogs, drinking fountains and things of that nature. But overall, we're very pleased. Lastly, Mr. Dougherty had asked about the lights at the dog park, if they were sufficient. We've included this photograph to show council that, of the 99 responses, only one person responded negatively to the amount of light, and that I think was a small dog park member. Even though we do have a light on the small dog park, it only lights the northern area, so the southern area of the park is quite dark. But as you can see from the photograph, I think we have sufficient light on the large dog park. And that's our summary. We're open to any questions.
Hey, Jason, this is Sandy. So do we know how much of our membership, you said there's 625 dog park members. Do we know how much of that membership is small dog users?
About 20% small dog park members. The membership isn't as large as 625. Those 625 represents the emails that we have on file. We believe the membership's more like 550.
My thinking is because over the years, I know that the small dog people have felt that that part of the park has not gotten the attention that the large park has. And so we might see improved membership if we were able to do some things to improve that area. If we were to consider lighting, I think the small dog area might be an area that we would want. Since you didn't do a drone photo of that, I mean, we don't have a way to see what it looks like, but I can kind of envision what it's like based on where the ball field lights are. But that might be an area to consider to put some lighting, but do it in a way that it doesn't bother the neighbors across 15th. But I would like to see us do something with a small dog area for sure.
Absolutely. And I think, with the irrigation system and the enhanced agronomic plan that Trevor's going to come up with, I think it's going to elevate that park substantially. We're also going to think about adding some shade and benches to that park.
And then one other thing for the large dog area, if anybody's been, and I know Corey has been to Brewhound, I know that they've got the water feature that's kind of like what the kids play in South Beach Park, and the dogs absolutely have a blast playing in that, I don't know, whatever you call it. But you know, that might be a fun thing to add to the large dog area at some point to if we're looking at amenities, because considering how hot it gets, and you know, that's a big concern. I think that would be a great amenity to add.
We'll definitely look into it.
Any other questions on the dog park?
Your hand up? I don't know if anybody's noticed.
Ms. Hoffman?
That's from earlier. I put it up a couple issues ago. I'm putting it down now.
I will say this with my, one other thing I wanted to mention that is, I think, monumental, and that is that Paws Park will be celebrating 15 years, May 1st. May 1st, we held the grand opening for the dog park, and it was a huge event that was a lot of fun. For those of you who weren't there, that's the first time I ever saw George Forbes kind of speechless, because he didn't support the dog park for most of the time, until he actually saw all the people and all the dogs, and he saw that it was a lot of fun and there were not a lot of fights, and it was a great place, and people, you know, it ended up being a good place for people to go. So May 1st is the anniversary of Paws Park, and I just suggested, and I hope we can do that at least we do something, maybe on social media, just to acknowledge that it's 15 years that the park has been in existence, and maybe at some point, whenever we have the opportunity to socially gather, we could do something with the dog park users, because I know that there were some comments about how they wish that there were something organized for the members. And I know years ago when we were doing fundraisers for the park, we always did a Halloween costume contest, and that was hugely successful, because believe it or not, people love to dress up their dogs, and they love to dress up with their dogs. And we raised a lot of money for the dog park. So anyway, might be something for us to consider doing as kind of a celebration for the 15 years that the park has been in existence. But anyway, thank you for doing the survey. One other thing I was going to mention, people not picking up after their dogs. That seems to be a continual problem everywhere, not just in the dog park, but it's really disappointing that people don't do what they're supposed to do. But I appreciate you guys doing the survey. I think it was very enlightening.
The only thing that I'd like to contribute is very similar to, I guess, Brewhound, that there is a social aspect, and there is minimal food. They get a food truck occasionally, and they have beer and wine and teas and some other stuff available. You know, I don't know if the right way to do it, but you know, if what's his name from Sneakers, that's taking over the restaurant?
Greg Pratt?
What's his name? Greg.
Greg.
Maybe in the future, that's something that, you know, Greg can set up over there in the afternoons or Friday afternoon for a happy hour or something, to make it more of a little more of a social place to go. I mean, I go to Brewhound a little more often, just because it is a little more social.
Fantastic. I think we've got some good input on this. With regards to the 15th year, we are going to do something on social media to let the public know about the 15 year. I did ask Jason to take a look and see if we had done any other types of celebrations for any of our other facilities. It does not appear that we have done anything with any type of predetermined notion. So at some point, we may come back to council and see whether or not you want to do some type of celebratory events for all of the facilities when they hit milestones and what those milestones should be. Everything from Sunshine Park to Seawalk Pavilion to Gonzales, you name it. You know, maybe we're celebrating 10, 25, and 50. I don't know. Or if you want to do every 5-year interval, but that's something we can talk about at another time.
My whole reason for bringing that up is just because the whole aspect of the dog park is a social aspect. And you know, when we were actually trying to get the dog park established, we had to spend some time explaining to people that even though it's called a dog park, it's really a place that is more for the people. And so I think that it does have a huge social component to it, which is why I thought a celebration for that, for the park, would be a good thing to do, because maybe some of the other parks don't necessarily have the same social component, but maybe they do. But in this particular case, I thought it would be kind of fun to do that. So thank you for looking into that.
It has a membership and stuff too. So, I mean, it does have a draw to invite. I'm not sure what you would do with other parks other than the golf course and the membership out there for celebration purposes.
You know, the ones that jumped out at me were Sunshine Park, obviously, is one that jumped out at me, especially with the families and the playground equipment. But that certainly, we'll bring it up at a future briefing for the council to talk about and see what makes sense. If we're done with the parks, as we indicated, the fourth item that was on the list, which was the parks assessment, Jason and his staff are still working on. That one's a little bit more in-depth and needs a little bit more time before it's ready for prime time. But we are ready to move on to the next topic, which was one of the priorities for council, which was phase 1 of the charter revisions. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Ambrosio. He sent out some material to each of you in advance of the briefing tonight, which contained draft language put together by our consulting attorney. And with that, Chris, I'll let you take it away.
Okay. So submitted with tonight's materials is the first draft of our proposed ordinance that addresses the phase 1 initiatives that the council established. And we've covered all 4 items sorry, let me close the close the window of the beautiful office that you let me work in. All 4 items are covered in the ordinance, and it's part of what's titled as Composite Exhibit 1. And of course, that addresses the supermajority vote of council to remove the city manager, and also removing gender references that were in that section as it relates to the city manager. The same for the city attorney. But the city attorney section is much smaller than the managers. I'd be glad to answer any questions about both of those. And then the other 2, of course, is a supermajority vote of council and voter referendum to eliminate any city department. And then finally, the section on council and appointees shall not interfere in the performance of a city employee's duties. And that section was substantially added to. And Cliff, our consultant, and I worked on that in several phases and really contemplated the language of that. But of course, it's a briefing tonight, so please share with us any of your comments, concerns, and we'll be glad to continue to work on it. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have on that ordinance.
On the supermajority, I agree with the supermajority votes of the council for the 3 things that it's been added there for, but for the elimination of a city department, to have the supermajority and a vote of the citizens. I mean, if we have a 7-0 vote on the council, then it would still have to go to a citizen referendum. That just seems really excessive to me. Seems like it should be or a referendum. If there's a clear business case for something and the city council decides on it, you know, especially at a supermajority, I just don't understand why it would then go to the voters. as well. Because you could make an argument for any of these to go to the voters as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would say that there's probably some municipalities that would call for every single one of these and more to go to voter referendum. My understanding was that as it relates to the history of the Jacksonville Beach Fire Department, that one of the primary concerns was to have both elements as in this part, which is
well, in that case, we had neither element. We didn't require supermajority either. So even just a supermajority would have changed that particular vote. So I don't know. I don't have a good example of when this would come up again to kind of run a scenario in my brain, and maybe others do. But I mean, I feel like a supermajority. I mean, if we have a business case for something, supermajority votes for it, and either we have to do a special election to put it before the voters, or we have to wait until the next ballot. I mean, I just can't see how, if there's a case to be made that a supermajority of the counselors are voting on something, that we would then also have to go to the voters with it. I'm willing to listen to be convinced on that. But on first blush, to me, a supermajority would be, I agree with a supermajority. I agree with that for the city manager, the city attorney, and for elimination of a department. But
I think you would need, I think maybe one or the other. If you had a regular majority vote and then it goes to the referendum, or the super majority, because I mean, it seems like it's going to be. I would just pick one or the other.
I don't like having one or the other, because then if we wanted to take it up, you're going to have a lot of people that would press for a referendum and taking that decision away from their elected officials. So it creates conflict in the city.
Well, Phil, what I was saying is that, well, my understanding is that right now it's saying that it would have to have a supermajority and then go to a referendum.
I agree with Chris that it shouldn't be, or it should just be supermajority vote, period. I don't think it should be for referendum. And there's a process. If somebody wanted to get something put up for a referendum, there's a process that they can go ahead and do that. That's completely separate from our duties as elected officials, that they elect us to make those decisions. I agree with the supermajority, but I don't agree that it should require both. And I don't think eliminating a department should go for referendum unless the citizens somehow got it put on the ballot.
We've got a couple of hands raised. So just to use that function so that it's clear we're going in some type of an order. We've got, let's go to Councilmember Dumont and then Councilmember Golding. Each of your hands are raised.
Thank you. I understand Chris's argument. Yeah, so if something is a 7-0 vote, it's kind of a, why does it need to go to citizens? But I would say that with the fire department, people were extremely upset that they did not have a say in it. So I think it's the gravity of the department. This is something that's not going to happen often. There aren't many things that we can contract out. So I feel comfortable having both of them. My concern ends up being police and Beaches Energy. Those are the two big ones that I think citizens, as well as a supermajority of council, need to be on board. Because if you have a 4-3 vote, 5-2 vote to get rid of the police department, that has a lot of gravity. So let's just say that people are termed out, they're not going to be running again, and they're perfectly fine getting rid of the fire department, getting rid of the police department, because it's going to, you can make the argument that it costs a lot of money. And Jacksonville JSO has horses and buggies and all these fun toys. So we want to get rid of our police department so we could use those kinds of things. Those are arguments that can be made, even if it makes it on a 5-2 vote for whatever reason. That is something that should be going to the citizens. Yes, we are elected officials. We set the policy direction, but when it comes to changing, that really does change the structure of government, as well as the power structure and the power that the city manager and the city attorney have over the functioning of departments in the city, as well as the network of the city departments. So that, like I said, the two big ones are Beaches Energy and the police department. And if that were to ever go in front of council, not that it would, but if it were, that definitely should be a supermajority, as well as the citizens get the say as well.
We can jump over to Counselor Golding and then Counselor Nichols.
The only comment I was going to make was, and Georgette brought it up, was that the police department and Beaches Energy, certainly we know just with what's happened recently with JEA that really caused a lot of issues in the community. So those are two departments that I think would be pretty serious, and the community would want to have some say in that. So I just wanted to mention that. And it won't come up a lot, but if it came to those two departments, I think it would be something that would be a big issue for the community.
And I guess I'm fine with making a supermajority for those two specific entities, and that's it. I mean, I don't like the fact that I think the majority should be fine. I mean, if we vote this way to go to the supermajority, the fire would not have passed, and so y'all are saying we did the wrong thing. And I mean, that bothers me. And I mean, I would be all right with the two designating specifically the Beaches Energy and the police department. But I think we're elected. I think it's a 4-3 is like 60% almost. And I think that's substantial to be able to make the decisions we need to make. I mean, obviously a lot of the people in Jacksonville Beach, I mean, we live in a great place as it is. It's very easy to get a small group of people that are very vocal about an issue to be very loud about it when it doesn't reflect the majority of the community. I think a 4-3 vote on just about every issue should be sufficient. And I'd advise about going away from having a supermajority on anything other than Beaches Energy and the police department.
I'd like to throw out for council consideration. It is not uncommon in your charter to have one or more departments that are specifically called out that are regulated by a vote of the public. I can tell you that the community that I came from had that provision within its charter, and it was very specific to the police department and the police department only. If the biggest concerns for council at this point in time would be specific to the police department and Beaches Energy, then my suggestion would be that you focus specifically on those two departments and putting language in here that specifically calls for a vote of the public. With regards to supermajority or simple majority, either way, it still has to get to a ballot, which means either a majority of council members needs to vote in favor of putting it on the ballot, or there needs to be enough citizens that can actually go through some type of a ballot petition process. And Chris, I don't know if that's anything we've looked at as to whether or not that is in our charter, where the residents can do a citizen-initiated charter amendment. But if that doesn't exist, then it would still need at least a simple majority by council to put it to ballot. And then you still need a majority of the public saying that they support the move to eliminate either of those two departments. So I think that maybe is where the focus should be, is on those two particular departments. Those two tend to be the ones that are more critical or have more of a community impact in the event that a community were to lose either of those two departments, either their utilities or their police department. And I see we have more hands raised. So Corey, let's go back to you. That'll be followed by Chris Hoffman.
I'm done with that. And I agree with what you're saying. If it's going to be both a vote of the council to send it to a referendum, then I think a simple majority should be sufficient, because then it's going to be a referendum. So, I mean, if we go that direction, and I do think it needs to be specific for just Beaches Energy and the police department.
And Counselor Hoffman?
Um, I agree with the police department and Beaches Energy being of paramount concern. And Mike, is there any scenario that you could think of, just envision that there would be any other department in the city that would be under consideration in terms of consolidation or whatever, as far as eliminating? Is there, I mean, are we really just talking about police and energy here?
You can't say never.
Right.
Am I looking at anything personally for the city? The answer is no. That doesn't mean that in 5 or 10 years, you could have a push to consolidate the beach's water systems.
Mm-hmm.
Come up with a consolidated wastewater district for all 3 beach communities. That's always a possibility. But again, the ones that I've seen most prominent is police department always seems to be that number 1 at the top of the list in interior of charters. And then again, your utilities. Beaches Energy is a utility. Obviously, our public works department does contain additional utilities, both the water and wastewater. So if we wanted to, we could expand it to the 3rd, which would be public works and its water and wastewater elements. The only concern I've got with regards to the restriction on eliminating departments is that the language, I think, would need to be phrased in such a way that if the services are being reconsolidated back into an originating department or another department of the city, that's not technically the elimination of a department. And I'll give you an example. One of the things that we've been exploring on our end in administration is whether or not IT, information technology, is now robust enough that it should be spun off as its own department. It is not uncommon in all organizations to have an MIS, Management Information Systems or Services, where finance, HR, and IT are all rolled into one department. And as the organization grows and as the services grow, they get large enough that they spin off into individual departments. If you get to something like, oh, I don't know, a recession or a depression, you may have a need to combine those back into one home department. The language would need to be specific that if you're contracting the service out as part of the elimination, as opposed to rolling it back into another in-house department. I'd want to make sure that we're very clear with any language we propose with that.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm concerned about, is that if there's a real legitimate internal business case, that your hands are tied here. But follow-up question, as far as Beaches Energy, we've all sat on the sidelines to see what happened with JEA. I would definitely be willing to consider and act upon greater protections for Beaches Energy to make sure that utility is as protected as it can be from political whims. And I'm done.
With that, we'll jump over to Councilor Golding, followed by Councilor Nichols.
Thank you. So yeah, to your point, Mike, that was one of the things I wanted to ask about, because the way it's currently worded, the elimination of any department, that was a little bit concerning for me, because then if you come in and you find out, well, we don't really need this particular department anymore, or it can be consolidated with another department, does that then cause us a problem? So I think that needs to be addressed. The other thing I was going to say with regard to the question about voter referendums, I can tell you from very, very intimate knowledge with our charter and with citizen initiated referendums that we do not have anything in our charter that defines how citizen initiated referendums will be done in the city of Jacksonville Beach. So everything defaults to the state and what the state defines in regard to how you do a citizen initiated referendum. That's something that we might want to consider, but that would be something I guess we would want to consider in our larger charter review. If we wanted to put something into our charter that actually clearly defines the process that is required for a citizen initiated referendum.
Okay, we'll jump over to Councilor Nichols, followed by Councilor Vogelsang.
Sorry. So we were talking about the same thing for the city manager position and the city attorney, right? That included in this is that would take a supermajority and a referendum to remove No, would it take a supermajority?
Just the supermajority of council, 5
For
votes.
both,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
for both,
For both.
majority, yeah.
Um, yeah, I'm opposed to that. I think that we need to stick with a simple majority. Absolutely think you guys are outstanding, but I think our history with our past city manager, that he became too powerful, and just being able to have to control a couple of votes on the council, I would be opposed to that. I think it should be a simple majority. I think as long as the city manager and the city attorney are doing a good job. I mean, right now there's full support of all council members. And the way a city manager structure is set up, it can really put a city manager in a position where he is way too powerful and controls every aspect of the city.
Up over to Councilor Vogelsang and Sandy and Corey, if you could both lower your hands.
I just, to piggyback what I think was already said, the protections for beaches energy for sure. So under the language now, it would be a supermajority vote and then it goes to a referendum. And Mike, you're saying if we just left it at majority vote, we would still vote to send it for a referendum? The question is whether or not to do supermajority?
That's correct. In order, as Councilor Golding just indicated, there currently is no provision in the charter for the citizen-initiated referenda, which means they either have to follow the state rule or council needs to place it on a referenda. And in order for council to place it on a referenda, just like the ordinance that's drafted in front of you, it needs to be drafted, it needs to go in front of council, and it needs to be voted on. And a majority vote needs to approve it in order to send it to referenda. So that would really just be a difference between supermajority vote and public referenda or simple majority vote and public referenda with regards to how you would structure it in the charter.
Go ahead.
Obviously, there's still the opportunity that if it's something the public really wanted, they could go out and follow that state requirement in order to put it on the referenda. Chris Ambrosio, I think the one thing we would need to check is if the charter calls for a dual ratification process, simple majority by council and a simple majority vote of the public. If it's public initiated, does the council still need to sign off on it with a simple majority approval? You could end up with a 51% vote of the public with the council never having voted on it. And if it comes back around to the council, if they decide not to take it up or not to vote on it, does that mean it does not go through? If the charter,
Right. The way I understand it is that if it's a public initiated referendum, then the vote is the determining factor. It's not, it doesn't stem from the council, it stems from the public. And then there's a statutory process about how that goes about. By the way, the Florida statute states that a municipality may, by unanimous vote of the governing body, abolish municipal departments provided for in the municipal charter and amend provisions or language out of the charter which has been judicially construed. The most important part of that is that the statute only calls for a unanimous vote of the governing body to abolish a municipal department. So that doesn't limit the council doesn't prevent the council from having a stricter requirement with respect to the police department and beaches. So I could simply redraft that section of this proposed ordinance so that it states something along the lines of a simple majority vote. No, you want a super majority vote and voter referendum to take place with respect to police and beaches energy. And only those two departments, right?
I'm kind of on Corey's thoughts of a majority vote with the referendum support because it should go to the voters. And that should just require a majority vote. I don't understand the reason for a super majority if we're going to give it to the voters. I would argue that you need more votes if it wasn't going to the voters, but if it's going to the voters should control, right? I mean, I don't understand why we'd increase the number. They're the ones that voted us in. They're the ones that will be making the decision. Why do we need a super majority? We shouldn't.
Yeah.
And I agree, Beaches Energy and the police department.
So
I'm not the policymaker, but I agree with that as well. I mean, and again, before I assumed the office, of course, I was aware of what happened with the fire department as a local citizen. But then when I came on board, I was informed by several people that there was a great concern that the voters weren't involved, the citizens weren't involved in that. So that was my understanding of us trying to fortify that as best as we can. And I also agree that it doesn't seem too conceivable of any of the other departments being subject to what the fire department was, other than police department and beaches. It's not like we're going to, or the council is going to suddenly expect to eliminate or abolish the city clerk's office or human resources department. Mike's example of IT seems like the only other potentially logical department, but you're not going to outsource Parks and Rec to City of Jacksonville. So
well, let's jump over to Councilor Dumont and then Mayor Latham.
She's had her hand up longer than me.
Who has? Okay, I thought they were in order the way they pop up on the screen, but Mayor Latham and then Councilor Golding.
Just a quick question for Chris Ambrosio. We've had a couple county administrators or county managers terminated in the last 6 months in Northeast Florida. St. Johns County was a couple of 2-3 months ago. Alachua County was a few years ago. I wasn't there when that happened, but I'm just curious, have we looked at other counties to see whether or not they require a majority or a super majority?
no, Mayor, I haven't gone that far with it because I was under the impression that was what my council was looking for. So Cliff, our expert, and we didn't go that far, but in 2 minutes, I can find that out with a conversation with Cliff, and we could have that information.
I think it'd be a good idea to know what others around us are doing and before we try and reinvent the wheel.
Okay.
Particularly when they've been involved in exercising that authority.
Okay.
Georgette, did you want us to come back to you and then to Councilor Gold?
Yeah, Sandy's been the one with her hand up the longest. Not that it's actually up, but her virtual hand is really tired by now.
And I just have a quick comment because this was a statement was made earlier. I believe the state has changed the threshold, I guess you might say, for referenda. And I think that they have to be, I think referenda pass only by 60% or more of the vote. It's not 50% plus one anymore. That's been changed. So I just want everybody to be aware of that because it's not, it's a higher standard now than what it used to be. So even on the referendum, it still has to pass by over 60% of the vote.
We'll jump down to Councilor Nichols. Councilor Dumont, your hand is still raised. Did you want yours still raised?
Yeah, I was just waiting for Sandy to get called on.
Let's go with you then. Okay.
Okay, thank you. So with the language, definitely call out the police as well as Beaches Energy. I understand the argument with the supermajority and then the citizen referendum. I was the one who first brought this up about a year ago, and no, less than a year ago. When this was first brought up, this is like a big thing for me, is to make sure that the fire department kind of a thing doesn't happen again with just a simple majority of council. I'm trying to protect government structure from politics. And to do that, I suggested a supermajority of council. It got at the supermajority of the, or a majority, supermajority, 60% of the citizens was added in. So I'm okay with having one or the other kind of, so I'm okay with a supermajority of council, but when I say supermajority of council, I also mean for getting rid of the city manager as well as the city attorney. That provides continuity and protects their jobs from political whims of council, which happens. So that's that one, that one, that one. Yes. Okay, that's my list. Thank you.
Okay, back to Councilor Nichols.
Well, as Chris said, that, you know, I guess he had a lot of, he heard a lot from the residents that they didn't have a say in that. And I mean, you know, they vote us in. I mean, the cost to do a referendum, I mean, we're not talking about doing it outside of the normal time frame of a normal voting block, right? So I mean, it might be a year. We're not going to do a special referendum to remove the city attorney. Sorry to use you as an example, Chris, but I mean, there's a pretty substantial cost to that process, and you know, I don't think that.
Excuse me one second. I don't think I was clear. When I said supermajority, that is only of council for city attorney and city manager. Not, that doesn't go to a vote of the people. Fire and Beaches Energy would go to the vote of the people. And I don't know if I was clear with that. So that's just a clarifying.
No, I heard you. And the reason I don't agree with that is just because in the past, those positions have gotten too powerful. And I think a simple majority, you know, is a pretty high bar to reach to make those changes. If something has to be pretty substantially wrong with those positions, or the majority of the population would have to think that it was these people, that a change needed to be made. Sandy, you said something a minute ago that I wanted to comment. Oh, just back to you're right about the supermajority on referendums, that it would need to be 60% on those. I just always found it humorous that came into law did not get a supermajority vote. It passed by 57%. So I always thought that was interesting. But again, I think the city manager, city attorney should be able to be removed by a simple majority vote. And for the other issue, for specifically the police department and the fire department, I think it should be a simple majority vote and then a referendum. Because I don't foresee that happening anyway.
Let's jump over to Councilor Vogelsang, followed by Councilor Golding.
Does it have to be a 60% vote, or can we dictate a majority vote, Chris? Like, does it have to go as a referendum, or can we just put what we want on the ballot and say, let's just use the fire department as an example? Can we say it requires a majority vote of the council, and then it requires a majority vote of our citizens? Is that something you're allowed to do, or does it have to go as a referendum and pass by 60%? Or do we get to control that in our charter since we're dealing with our own departments?
Yeah, you get to control it. And again, this isn't a charter amendment, so to speak. This is a vote to eliminate or abolish a department.
Right.
So, I mean, technically, you can do it, you could abolish the department just by a unanimous vote of the council. So that's technically all it requires per Florida law. Doesn't have to go referendum.
I guess I would support a majority vote. I wouldn't think that it needs to be 60%. What is,
Right.
That's-
That's for an amendment of the charter. And what we're discussing is a section of our charter that's going to authorize or at least establish the procedure to abolish or eliminate a department. And whether that's going to be held solely in council's power or shared with respect to police department and beaches, shared by council and the voter.
and if we share it with the voter, we can make that threshold whatever we want it to be to get that vote, or does it have to be a 60% vote is my question.
No, I don't think it has to be 60% vote.
Okay.
No.
I'd like everybody else's thoughts, but I don't know why we would require that to be 60%. We're going by what our citizens want. It should only need a 50% vote, in my opinion.
Right. And that's the way we currently have it drafted as a majority.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't catch that. I'm sorry.
It's drafted as a majority of the voters.
Okay.
So,
I think the referendum percentage threw me off. That discussion shifted to me thinking we needed 60%, and that wasn't making sense. So I appreciate
right. And I don't want to get in mess up the order of whose hands are up, but my understanding is that it sounds like there's a concern about the other departments other than police and beaches, energy. The distinction being that an elimination or abolishment of those departments, that wouldn't go to a referendum at all. And I just wanted to get a consensus from the council that that's my understanding with respect to every other department other than police and beaches. However, are you saying that for those departments, you as a body would want me to draft it as just a majority vote to abolish or eliminate those other departments, or do you still want that to be a super majority vote with respect to those departments?
that's the discussion. I don't.
Right. Okay.
I don't know.
I'll keep listening.
That's a good question. Let's jump over to Councilor Golding.
So Chris, for clarification, when you're asking about the vote, you're talking about the citizen vote or the council vote?
No, my understanding is that for all departments other than police and beaches, and I know we'll summarize this, but all departments other than police and beaches can be abolished or eliminated either a simple majority vote or a super majority vote of council. There's no referendum. With respect to police and beaches, it is again, I hear what Councilor Nichols is saying, but I think it's either the supermajority vote and referendum, or just a majority vote and referendum. But I think the point was that the body needs to discuss whether for police and beaches, whether they want it to be a super majority vote of council or just a majority vote of council. But it sounds to me that with respect to those two departments, the voter referendum is what the council would like. The other departments other than police and beaches, the question is do you want that to be super majority vote of council and that's it, or just a majority vote of council? Those don't.
So, okay, so I would say my 2 cents are for any of the other departments would be how we normally do it, which would just be a majority of the council. Police and beaches energy would be, I would be fine with a majority of council if it goes to referendum, because at least we're giving the citizens the opportunity to be the final say. And if we can indeed, because I guess maybe I misunderstood, but I thought statute limited all referendums to 60% or higher approval. But if that's not the case, then I would like to see us make it be 50% higher, 50% higher or whatever, for that, for Beaches Energy and the police department. And then just the only other point I wanted, just to put my position on record, I support supermajority for the city manager and for the city attorney.
Let's move over to Councilor Nichols.
Yeah, so just to clarify, to remove a department, it would just take a simple majority for everything. But Beaches Energy and the police department would have to go to a referendum where 50% plus one would be the determination. Correct?
Correct. And with respect to polices and beaches, there would need to be a super majority vote of council or just a majority vote?
It would be just a simple majority vote.
Okay.
And those two specific ones would go to a referendum where it's 50% plus one. And I like what the mayor said also, that I would like to look around the area and see what the other entities have done for removal of city managers, county managers, city attorneys, and compare that.
So I'm on board with that, with exactly what they had indicated with the majority vote, then 50 plus one on the referendum for the two major departments, majority vote for everything else. And then I want to wait and hear what other entities do as far as super majority or majority for positions like yours and Mike's.
So just as I don't think we have any new hands in the queue, which is good. Let me see if I can do a quick summation here to make sure we're on the same page with regards to departments. When it comes to Beaches Energy and the police department, that would require a simple majority of council and a referenda of the public with a 50% plus one in order to eliminate either of those two departments. With regards to any other department, it would require a simple majority of the city council to eliminate any of the others. I'm seeing a lot of heads nodding. Okay, so I think we encapsulated that one correctly. With regards to the elimination of this, the determination of city manager or city attorney, right now it is written as supermajority. Chris will go ahead and find out what's happening in other municipalities and counties around this area. Whichever one is the majority is probably what we'll bring back to council. If it's a simple majority, then we'll just strike the language from this proposal because that's already what's in charter. If there is a preponderance of other communities that are doing supermajority, when this ordinance comes back to you, that will be the language that's proposed for consideration.
And I'll look at the ones that the mayor noted when he commented about recent terminations.
So I think that handles the first three items in the ordinance, which takes us to the fourth item. There's still an item in here we haven't touched on yet, and that is revisions to section 30, which is council's interference with performance of city employees. And I see a hand up already, and that would be Council Member Dumont.
That's for the last one. It was up before you got to the fourth item. I know we want to look at what other counties and municipalities are doing, but just because they're doing it doesn't mean that it's actually in the best interest of the city all the time. So I think we should also look at which ones are run well, which ones have balanced budgets, so it's a lot more than just how many people are doing this one. So that one therefore has to be good. So we should really look at something a little bit deeper and connect the supermajority versus a simple majority and economic prosperity of the municipalities or the citizen satisfaction with their governments, things like that. Because just because one group does it a lot doesn't mean that that is the best way. If you look at forms of government, a city manager form, a council manager form of government is the most efficient form of government with regard to attracting businesses and continuity and all that stuff. That's what the data shows, yet we still have strong mayor forms of government. and so there are the other variables with populations, but so just because one is done a lot doesn't make it right.
I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to make an executive administrative decision. And the only reason I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it publicly and where it's being televised and recorded, is because it's very clear to see that anyone could look at it and say the city manager and the city attorney both have a potential or perceived conflict of interest to push an item like this forward, because both he and I would be the benefactors of such a change to the ordinance. So if it's okay with the council members that are here, we will go ahead and leave this language in with regards to supermajority, provide you with the information that's going on in other communities. And when this ordinance comes back in front of you for consideration, if any of you don't like the supermajority, any of you can make a motion to remove that from the ordinance package on first reading. And if it is stricken, we will proceed with the rest of the package as it's written. But clearly, I know that it's something I'm uncomfortable talking about from the perspective that I came into this position and into this organization under a simple majority rule. And if council deems that it's worthy to change to a supermajority, that is clearly something that you should decide on your own without any undue influence from the city attorney or I.
And if that's the case, I have my hand up. If
Yeah.
that's the case, shouldn't it come forward with a simple majority and a vote would need to take place in order to change that language? Shouldn't the current language in there be a simple majority, saying that's what it is right now?
The original request when we talked about revising the charter said for a supermajority, and that's what the council moved forward with the draft prior to this meeting.
I'm still going to stick with my original executive decision. We're going to put it forward to you all, and you all can make the decision when it comes in front of you for final determination. But we will provide additional backup of what's being done in other communities.
And I will focus on the council manager form of government too. That's a great suggestion. I also have a file on dozens of cities that require a unanimous 7-0 vote. How about that? Does that work? No, okay.
I think we should require an 8-0 vote.
All right.
You guys can stay forever.
So I think that moves us into the very last item on the draft ordinance, which is the section 30. Do any of the six of you have any comments, suggestions, or thoughts with regards to the reworked language that Cliff and Chris's input put together here? Corey, is that still your hand raised or is that from before? Hearing nothing with regards to section 30, Chris Ambrosio, I think that wraps up your ordinance issue for the evening and pushes us into the final item with regards to animal control.
Yes. So this topic is covering our current, what's titled as dogs and cats. It's our animal code. And also following this, we'll discuss dogs on beach and dogs on leashes, dogs on leashes on beaches, and then in public at large in general. But let me first just take 30 seconds to use this chance to acknowledge Riley Jacobs, who never gets mentioned or receives due attention. But I've worked with Riley a lot and recently, and Riley is the city employee, I think, that probably confronts the most disturbing situations to perform her duties. She confronts very unsettling situations involving animals and pet owners and the homes that those pets are kept in. And I just want to acknowledge Riley because no one ever mentions her, and working with Riley, she treats these sometimes very awful situations with compassion and tenderness, and of course follows the law in her performance of her duties. But she is incredibly capable of being able to confront these very difficult and unsettling situations. And she has the most calm demeanor, very professional way of handling it. So I just wanted to give her some public attention for her great work. And I can't talk about this topic without mentioning Riley's work. So, and I know, and Riley's on tonight with her sergeant so that they can answer your question. But so I've arrived at, reading our animal code and several others with the help of Elise. We've compiled, of course, Neptune Beach, Atlantic Beach, several, the city of Jacksonville, several other neighboring counties and cities. And what got me here is that I feel like this is another portion of our code of ordinances that needs substantial revision and work. I would say that when compared to some of the other local governments, we're missing out on a lot of the sections that enable our animal code officers to perform their work. And I think some of our fines are too low. So of course that's for purposes of enforcement and to encourage people to do the right thing according to our law. We have a very, very brief definition section just to begin with our code. It needs to be much more substantiated. We need to address a lot more in the definitions. I think we need to provide our code officer with more authority and enable him or her to do the job that they need to do in the field. And I feel like Riley has expressed to me that some of her counterparts in other local governments feel much more empowered by their animal code, and Riley is somewhat disarmed in what she's able to do because of our code. It's a little deficient in many areas. It's also it's a confusing code in that there are some sections, of course, that are carryovers from 1955, and then there are some sections that are, more recent, 2015 or so. But there are sections that don't fully or address at all the enforcement procedure, the fine procedure, a fees, a fine schedule. It doesn't describe how in what manner the animal code officer can issue a fine, and then perhaps an authority of the special magistrate to review any of the fines. I mean, it's just lacking. It's lacking a lot. For example, the city of Jacksonville has a very substantial animal code. Now, they have sections that we most likely won't touch on. They have sections that we don't need to incorporate: microchipping, racing dogs, education programs, swine and livestock, sellers and breeders. So we don't need to be 61 pages, but the other sections of the city of Jacksonville animal code that would translate well to the city of Jacksonville Beach, those I could incorporate into an ordinance to bring to the council, along with taking comments, of course, from our sergeant, from Riley, and I've already asked them for their input, and they've begun providing me with that. But before I go further into redrafting a whole animal code, I wanted to bring some of those concerns out to the council so that the council can give me instruction to draft a much more substantial ordinance that empowers and authorizes our animal code officers to do their job the way that she's expressed to me that she needs to be able to do it to benefit the city. And also for us to have greater sections that the citizens can understand and answer some of their questions about, for example, what our next topic will be about leash laws and what the dogs on beach rules and laws are. And so that goes hand in hand with the discussion we'll have about the leash requirement, dogs at large, and dogs on beaches. But I just am looking for council instruction to continue to work with Riley and her sergeant and bring to council draft ordinance language that changes our code and substantiates it. Sure.
I see no problem with doing that.
Councilor Golding, you've got your hand raised, followed by Vice Mayor Hoffman.
So I'd like to mention a few things. Several years ago, I was asked to participate with the City of Neptune Beach on a special committee to review their animal ordinances because they wanted to improve their ordinances. And I was asked because of my involvement with the dog park. And so I spent a lot of time with that committee on their ordinances. And then I also worked with the City of Jacksonville with another committee on updating the Jacksonville animal ordinances. And I fully support us doing something about our ordinances because, as Chris has said, our ordinances are lacking. And this is something that we definitely need to do. And so I support you moving forward with it. One of the things I will mention too, that I think we need to look at, because I brought this up, I requested some, I did a public records request because we have a licensing program, but apparently we don't have very good compliance with the licensing program. And I would like to get Riley's input on this, how effective the licensing program is. Does it add any value? Is it something that we really need, or can we accomplish what we need to accomplish in other ways? Because based on the public records request I did, if you were to look at the number of households that we have in Jax Beach, we've a census estimate is about 10,970. And based on the AVMA estimates that 57% of households have pets. And if you were to apply that number to our households, then that would be over 6,000 pets in our community. However, the most licenses we've ever sold have been 357, and that was in 2011. Our licenses are maybe $2 or $3 because my husband and I get a license for our dog because our understanding was that helps the animal control officer if our dog ends up in the shelter. But I know we also have microchips now, and we have other ways to identify who that pet may belong to. And then we also got from the public records, I got some information about the fines that we've, the highest amount of fines that we received were in 2012, and that was a little over $9,000 that came from fines. So either we have an opportunity to do a better job with our licensing program and get more animals in our community licensed so that it's effective, and it potentially generates revenue in a positive way, not because we're out trying to make money, but because we are trying to discourage irresponsible pet ownership. Or we find another way to do what we need to do. So I support us looking at our animal ordinances very closely, and also looking at the licensing, if that's something that we should be doing or not. And I don't know, Riley, do you want to speak to that at all, or give us any of your thoughts on that?
I would say for the most part, we don't really use the licenses for anything. They don't really serve us much of a purpose animal control wise, unless we want to search through hundreds of pieces of paper just to figure out what the tag, what owner has a tag of which dog, which animal, and half the time they don't actually write their phone numbers down. So I have no way of getting in contact with them to tell them that, hi, I have your dog. So it really does not serve much of a purpose for us. And I don't really think much people know about it, so they don't even know that they have to have their dogs or cats registered, as well as most of the beaches areas don't require it. Anyways, we're the only beaches that actually require for animals to be licensed in the first place.
That was an issue that came up when I was working on the Neptune Beach Animal Ordinance Committee. And that was a question, and the recommendation by the committee was to do away with the licensing program because it really wasn't effective. And I will say, because I have volunteered for Jack's Beach Animal Control before, I do appreciate everything you do, Riley, and everything that that your predecessors have done as well, because it's a very important role in our community, and I know it's not an easy job. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Hoffman?
I just wanted to agree. I think in general, we're a pet loving community, but I think this council in particular is a pet loving group of people. I want to nominate Sandy to be an expert resource for you, Chris and Riley, because it sounds like she's done a lot of this legwork already. But I wanted to bring up the interlocal agreement. I'm not an expert on this. I would defer to Sandy, as she's probably much more familiar, but I've always heard that animal control is a big deficit there. I don't know if that's just a lost cause or if it's even worth bringing up at this point, but I don't want to just give up on responsibilities that the county is supposed to have if there is an opportunity to rebalance, but it may not be worth it, but I just wanted to bring it up at this point.
That's something that Chris and I can take a quick look at from an operational perspective, along with Riley's input. Clearly the interlocal does say that animal control is the city of Jacksonville operating as Duval County. The question is whether or not the level of service that they're providing to Jacksonville Beach is lower than what they're providing to the rest of the county. If it's comparable, and we just have a higher standard, then we can supplement that standard. If it's lower, then the argument can be made to the county, you need to provide us with an equivalent level of service to the other four corners of the county. But that's something we can look into and see where it falls. And we'll go back to Councilor Golding.
I just have a quick follow-up on that. So the city of Jacksonville, and Riley may know the number, but I want to say they have 15 or 17 animal control officers at the most to cover the entire county of Jacksonville. And I think our experience in the past has always been that the level of service that we would get here is lower. I think we just need to make sure that the parts that we would like to have them do are enforced, or that they're doing what they need to be doing in support of us, because I think that we're not going to get the level of service that we would like to have without having our own officers doing what they're doing, like what Riley is doing.
Let me just one quick thing for Riley. Riley, the recent event with the cats, and let's not say the name of the owner or the property address, but the recent situation with the large number of cats, that issue, did City of Jacksonville help you with that?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. They did the first go round with getting some of those cats out of there. They did come out. They scheduled with Riley to come out, and they worked in conjunction in getting those cats out. And they have since been seen medically and then released out. Now, this last go round, we're still working with them on that. Okay.
So I just wanted to answer the counselor's discussion on that. Was that it seemed that Riley had to communicate, once Riley communicated with the City of Jacksonville officers, they did assist her in a recent incident that involved a cat hoarding incident. So they were helpful once she reached out.
Correct.
Got it. Thank you.
And I would just say that we had a cat hoarding incident in Neptune Beach, and that's kind of how it worked out too. The, city of Jacksonville did help, but, and it's probably in the same way that they've been working with us on this incident, but the preliminary work is, or a lot of the work is done by our animal control officer, and then we can call them in for additional support, which is important, especially if you have a hoarding situation.
Not seeing any other hands raised. Oh, Mayor Latham.
And let me first apologize for walking out. That was Mayor Curry, but I kind of needed to take that call. I missed a lot of what was said, but I just want to say, let's give Riley the authority she needs to do the things that she needs to do to keep the animals safe in our community. My wife and I are very big animal lovers. I know Sandy is too. I know Chris is too. Let's not send her out there with false teeth. I mean, let's go out there and give her the ability to do what she needs to do, including breaking windows in cars if you see animals in the back of a vehicle and those types of things. I mean, I want to be able to support her to make good, intelligent decisions and protect our animals. I'm also wide open to Chris. And again, I apologize if I'm repeating anything that's already been said, but giving you the ability to go back and take a look at what works best for us. I know that there was an issue not too long ago. GP and Mike and I were on a call earlier today, and there was an issue not too long ago where there was an attorney, I guess, that was saying, hey, your construction says that I can't be on the beach. She's not on the beach, she's in the water. Those are the kind of things we need to give you the authority to go and iron them out. Let's get it fixed and let's protect our animals. That's all I had to say.
Okay, great. So any more hands, Mike? I'm sorry.
I believe that's everyone. Sandy, yours is still up from before, correct? No other hands raised on this topic.
Okay, so we will get to work on revising our animal code. And the next topic on animals is the beach, dogs on beach, dogs on leashes on beach, and then dogs at large or in general in the public. And I was, when Mike and I talked about the briefing topics, we made sense that there were some city council members that wanted to get some information about this. Mike has issued some emails on it, and I'd be glad to discuss those items for you. We've done some research on some of our neighboring local governments with respect to their leash laws at large in the public, and then beach regulations and leash or dog regulations on the beach.
I think what we're really looking for here is some policy direction from council as to how Chris should rewrite the codes or the ordinances that he's tackling when it comes to pets on leashes. We have, and Chris, correct me if I'm wrong with any of this, we have one code that stipulates any dogs anywhere in the city or any pets anywhere in the city must be on a leash. The only time they can be off of a leash is if they're on your own personal private property or they are in the city's dog park. Those are the only two exceptions that a pet can be off a leash. The second code that we have is related specifically to pets at the beach. And all of that is written from the perspective of the pet being on the beach. There has been some issue over the number of years that this one's been in place where there has been, I don't know if the right way to say it is just a practice, but the practice of the city has been if the pet is in the water, whether that's in the surf or actually in the water, there's not been an enforcement of the requirement to be on the leash. If council tells us that its policy initiative is that all pets must be on leashes unless they're on private property or in the dog park, then we will make sure that Chris rewrites those codes so that they are very explicit and give everyone from Riley through the police department to enforce what they need to enforce. But we really need to hear from you what your intention is specific to being on a leash and locations within the city. First hand up is Corey, followed by Sandy.
Just back to the first stuff you were talking about, you said that the only place currently that a dog can be unleashed is in the dog park or on your own private property. I mean,
That's
would your
correct.
dog be allowed to be unleashed on somebody else's private property? If it's your, I mean, with their approval?
We,
I'm not sure that,
we don't currently have it drafted that way, but it's,
I mean, I let my dog go to my neighbor's house to be, to play with their dogs and stuff. But I mean, so theoretically, I mean, I'm outside the ordinance.
it's another ordinance that quite frankly is very vague from 1955.
Mhm.
It reads, this is section 5-28. It's called leash required for dogs in public places. And it states that no dog shall be allowed in public places such as hotels, theaters, streets, or upon property other than that of its owner, unless the dog shall be fastened to a suitable leash of dependable strength not to exceed 8 feet in length within the city. So actually the way that this reads, your friend's private property doesn't fall into this
Because it's not
this
public.
category, this requirement.
Okay.
Yeah, and then the second part of that section is that within the physical boundaries of the dog park in Wingate Park, dogs may be allowed off leash by their owner or handler so long as the owner or handler remains at all times within the physical boundaries of the dog park and maintains control of the dog at all times. That comprises our entire at what should be known as our at-large or public leash law. Those two brief sentences. And I could develop that much more and clearer if council would like me to.
Okay. I know an issue around the city has been owners not picking up after their pets and on the beaches and in parks. I'd like to have the dog bag dispensers maybe attached to the wooden garbage can holders on the beach, and when they and those get replenished, because I mean I see a lot of people, I get asked at least once a week from somebody asking if I have an extra bag. And sometimes people run out or they forget or they bring the wrong leash, but that's one of the places that I'd like to. I don't think the cost is that much, and I think it helps keep our city clean. But can you elaborate, Chris, on what our neighboring communities are doing about dogs on the beach?
Yes, for dogs on the beach, Atlantic Beach, for example, has a law called leashing, titled leashing. It says, no dog shall be allowed off the property of its owner unless the dog is fastened to a suitable leash of dependable strength not to exceed 12 feet in length. Such leash must be attached to a fixed object or held by a person capable of controlling the animal. On Atlantic Beach, if the dog and owner are in the ocean together, the dog shall be allowed to swim unleashed and then immediately put back on the leash before returning to the beach. This does not include walking the dog in the water. That's Atlantic Beach's code. The Neptune Beach, I'm gonna paraphrase it a little bit because it's much longer. It's 3 times longer than Atlantic Beach's, but Neptune Beach requires that no dog shall be allowed off the property of its owner unless the dog is fastened to a suitable leash of dependable strength not to exceed 12 feet in length. Such leash must be attached to a fixed object or specifically held by a person capable of controlling the animal. There's no limitation. Their section is not meant to put a limitation on a service dog when necessary for the service dog to work with the handler. And there's exceptions for dogs involved essentially in law enforcement activities or training for tracking, that type of exception. But otherwise, they are saying that no dog shall be allowed off of the property of its owner unless it's leashed. So that's similar to what Jacksonville Beach's the requirement is that the dogs must be leashed. When they're off the property, they must be leashed when in public places. Atlantic Beach has the carve out sentence there that makes an exception for when the dog and the owner are swimming in the water. And then when the dog comes out of the water, that the dog is to be immediately placed on a leash.
I think that definitely needs to get refined because it's challenging in Jacksonville Beach because a lot of people figure if their dog's in the water at all, they don't have to be on a leash.
We'll jump over to Vice Mayor Hoffman, followed by Mayor Latham.
I was just going to point out that I think the length of the leash is going to be an issue because ours currently says 8 feet and the two that you just referenced say 12 feet. And there's some controversy related to the retractable leashes. And I don't think we necessarily want to make a statement on that as a city, but that's just something to think about. I think that I don't see a lot of people out swimming the coast with their dog right now. So I don't think that the leash law needs to exempt those people. I think mostly what we're seeing are the people that I've talked to that think that they're exempt from the leash law when their dog is in the water is their dog is in 2 inches of water and then running out and fetching a tennis ball and coming back. That dog should be on a leash, in my opinion. If they're in the water and not in a full swim, then they can easily get back on the beach and run and attack another dog or whatever the other concerns are with the leash law. So I would like us to tighten that up as well as be really consistent with our enforcement of that one.
Mayor Latham, followed by Councilor Nichols.
I agree with what Chris just said. You know, the concern that I have, like you said, you're not going to see people out there swimming with their dog. 99% of the problem that we have are throwing tennis balls into the ocean and the dogs running in and running back out. And, you know, look, like I say, I'm a dog owner. I've been with dogs most of my life. They've never been violent but it happens. It happens where these guys go out there, a dog gets threatened or a dog doesn't want to, you know, play nice. And all of a sudden we get a kid bit and, you know, there's the owner's not in control of the dog. That creates a problem for us. It creates a liability for us. So I'm kind of like all or nothing on the leasing when it comes to the beach itself. With regard to Corey's comment about the going to the neighbor's yard, you know, I'm kind of okay with that too. I don't know if we can put something in the instruction or in the ordinance that would say something to the effect is as long as you have written permission or of the another private business owner or another private property owner to use their property, you know, something along those lines. But yeah, for me with the leash on the beach, to me it's an all or nothing thing.
Back to Councilor.
I'll agree with. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was next.
You are, followed by Councilor Vogelsang.
Gotcha. And I agree with the mayor also. I mean, that's really the issue on the beach is that the dog's off the leash. And that's why, you know, I want to address the time constraints on the beach for 6 months of the year. It seems pretty arbitrary. If your dog is on a leash, if you can take them to a city park, you can walk them on any other city property at all. You know, I mean, why are we doing it for the safety of people? Because there's a lot of people, or are we doing it for the protection of the animal? I believe that, and I can ask Riley about this as well, is that there are if a pet owner is taking their dog to the beach on the hottest day of the year and putting it in a health issue, that's a problem with the pet owner. I think saying that the residents of Jacksonville Beach cannot bring their dogs on the beach between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. for 6 months of the year is just arbitrary. I mean, in the month of April, there's not been a day that would have been too hot to have your dog on the beach. I'd like to look at either removing that, because the dogs will be on the beach and in control of the owner, and if or at least reducing that time from the 6-month window to a 3-month window that incorporates the summer, June, July, and August. The rest of those months, there's not a substantial amount of issues. And if you look at the number of issues and you talk to Chief Smith, there has not been a substantial amount of issues with dogs, with attacks or bites. And once you take them, put them on, make sure they're on the leash, and that'll help the enforcement of that, of the dogs, and keeping them in control of their owners, that any dog bites, because I think there was 4 dog bites of another, there were 4 dog bites over the last 2 years, and 6 citations, leash violation citations, and 40 for hours occupied. But I'd like to come up with a clear and using some scientific knowledge and say, okay, this is why it's hot in this area, and try to figure out, are we protecting the dog? Are we protecting the people? Or what are we trying to do?
Councilor Vogelsang, followed by Councilor Dumont.
I'm in support of just a leash law, period, 12 feet. And they should be able to go on the beach anytime if they're controlled by the owner, in my opinion. I don't know why we say otherwise. So, and the whole water thing, clean that up, but strict leash law provision, not long leash, because that does affect the safety for people when they have a retractable leash that's 30 foot long and their dog's running down the beach. So that does become a safety hazard. But when you have a shorter leash, I don't think there really is a safety hazard there to have your dog on the beach, as long as it's in your control.
Councilor Dumont, followed by Councilor Golding.
Thank you. The time, the 6-month on and off was not arbitrary. The council, when they voted for having the dogs on the leash 24 hours a day for 6 months a year, dealt with daylight savings time, so people could still walk their dogs, not in the dark, in the morning and in the evening. So it wasn't arbitrary at all. I think when we're looking at the summer, there are 2 issues: is the health of the dog. Very, very hot. It can be very hot. But there's another issue where our beaches get kind of crowded, and a 12-foot leash is a rather long leash, and that invades space. And I believe we all here love animals. There are people who are terrified of animals, and that they should be able to enjoy the beach just as much as people who love animals without the fear of a dog, even the friendliest dog. They just are very scared of animals. So I would stay with the 6 months on, 6 months off, clean up the leash law, water, all that stuff. But I would not opt for 24/7 all year long. I think the 6 months on and off work currently, as long as all the dogs stay on their leash.
Go over to Councilmember Golding, followed by Corey Nichols again.
When the issue came up with the hours, with the changed hours on the beach, one of the things that was really important was that we be consistent with our neighboring community of Neptune Beach, because it can be very confusing for people who come. A lot of people don't always know where the border of Beach is, where the border of Jack's Beach is, whatever. And, as someone who's gone to the beach during the summer, and I've seen a lot of people there, and I've seen dogs out there in the middle of the day, like at noon, when they're not supposed to be there, and the dogs have no place to go except they crawl up under the chair of some owner. And, you know, unfortunately, the problem is irresponsible owners, but there's a safety issue too for the animals. And, you know, honestly, my concern is Jack's Beach gets a whole lot more traffic than some of the other beaches do. So, you know, I'm a little bit concerned about opening up the beach to dogs all throughout the summer. Or, you know, I realize Atlantic Beach does it, and they don't seem to have any problems, but they also don't have the public parking that we do, and so they don't have the crowds that we do. And so I think we have to take that into account. And then as far as the leash length, the leash length goes, I tend to err a little bit more on the conservative side, and the 12 feet can be long, actually, when you think about it. And I'm okay with 8 feet that we have, but I'm willing to look at what, you know, what seems reasonable compared to what everybody else is doing.
Back to Councilor Nichols.
Well, and then Sandy, to the south of us where Ponte Vedra is, they allow their pets on the beach 24 hours a day down there throughout it. I mean, I'd like to maybe talk to Neptune Beach about, you know, getting in line with Atlantic Beach and coming up with something that all three beach communities can agree to. So there wouldn't be anything different. I mean, it bothers me when, you know, I've talked to people that have moved from Jacksonville Beach to Atlantic Beach just so they would be able to take their dogs on the beach. There's from a heat perspective, you know, there might be certain days that you know, it's ill-advised to take a dog on the beach because it's not safe for them. It would be ill-advised to take a child on the beach as well, or a baby. I mean, it's I think that should be on the owner. And I think that the laws about dog safety and cruelty to animals, if there's a problem, it could be, there's already enough there. And I'm concerned that that it's a little bit of overreach to add additional rules on it. Because a lot of people, just about everybody I know that lives on the beach has a pet. And you know, if it's on a leash and they're in control of it, just like you would walking down a sidewalk, it doesn't make sense to me that you're not allowed to take the dog on the beach.
Vice Mayor Hoffman, and your hand is still raised. Did you want to speak again on this issue? And Corey, your hand is still raised. Did you want to speak on the issue?
I put my hand up again.
Floor is yours.
I wanted to say I was someone who was very involved in the most recent change to our dog on the beach hours. And it's definitely the second most controversial issue I've ever been involved in, and the second highest amount of comments and phone calls. And the main problem was that people were not abiding by the leash laws as they were currently in place, and people were scared of that just becoming a 24/7 thing during the winter months. I think that was a huge change, though, to allow dogs on the beach during the winter, and I think it was a big difference, and I think it was very well appreciated by the dog owners. Corey, you said the residents of Jacksonville Beach should be able to bring their dog on the beach, but that's not what we're talking about. This would be anybody could bring their dog on the beach. In the summer months, they can already be out there until 9 and after 5, and I do not support changing this. And in fact, I would oppose changing the dogs on the beach hours during the summer at this point. Oh, and I did want to say, I do think that we should work towards giving Riley more bite to her bark. I've been working on that one.
Okay, so you said during the summer, I mean, would you be opposed to changing the months to?
No, I would not. No.
Riley, can you chime in and let me know what have you seen any issues with dog safety or health on the beach?
I can't exactly comment on that just because I started in December, so we haven't really been through our summer months yet. But when I did work in Neptune Beach, there was a big issue with people either not bringing water for their dogs or not providing shade for their dogs, and then either having to take them to the vet because they were severely dehydrated or just having any other health issue because they didn't have any type of shade. So that's definitely something that needs to happen if they were to change the hours, as well as making sure that the owners have to bring water for them as well. But I can't exactly comment on much of that because I haven't been able to be on the beach in Jack's Beach yet for the summer months. So
Thank you. But during the summer and during the spring, there are lots of days where there's nobody on the beach. The weather's overcast. Is there any way that we can write a provision into it to when there's not a crowd? I mean, I can't take it was 70 degrees or 65 degrees today, and there's hardly anybody on the beach. And granted, we could take them now because we have the exercise stuff in place, but typically this time of year, I can't take my dog on the beach. And Chris, is there any way that we could create, is there any way to come up with some kind of restriction instead of just saying it's all or nothing?
Yeah, we in terms of when a dog must be on the leash on the beach.
Yes, right now there's 6 months a year that from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. they're not allowed on the beach. But it seems like, if the concern is there's going to be lots of people on the beach and it's dangerous for people, or it's going to be really hot and bad for the dog, there's times when there's nobody on the beach and the heat is not in a situation where it's dangerous to the dog. I mean, is Riley still ticketing? Are we still ticketing people that have their dog on the beach during the day when it's no danger to anybody else and no danger to the dog? And is there any way to address that issue? Instead of saying, for 6 months you can't have it at all.
We could draft it that way. We could put a time limitation on it if that's what the council so directs.
I would suggest against that just because it becomes very unwieldy for the average person in public. As long as we stick with daylight savings time, there's some kind of a bound, but what do you consider too hot, too cold? Oh, not too cold. What do you consider too hot? What do you consider too crowded? Are we supposed to go out there and measure the distance between people on the beach? So yes, you could write the ordinance in such a way, but it's not enforceable when written in such a way. So I agree with just keeping it the 6 on, 6 off. And you brought up Ponte Vedra, but when you look at Ponte Vedra, Neptune Beach, and Atlantic Beach, they don't have the public parking. And that makes Jack's Beach very unique. And I think just being able to line up with Neptune Beach was a big move. So kudos to Chris on your 6 on, 6 off. But yeah, I would not be in favor of changing that part. Now, all the other stuff, yes, but not the 6 on, 6 off.
And I'll mention to the council that for all of the jurisdictions that we've researched, including the Atlantic Beach, Neptune Beach, St. Johns County, Flagler, Bernardina Beach, Amelia Island, Nassau County, I think there's 1 or 2 more. None of them seem to have that type of situation. Neptune Beach offers that. There's a particular one part of the year it's a time frame, and then the other part of the year it's a time frame. But otherwise, they are all very strict. It's uniform annually. The entire year it's the same, and they all require the dog to be leashed at all times. with the exception of what I read about Atlantic Beach, about the owner and the dog swimming together and then the dog having to be immediately placed on the leash once the dog comes back onto the beach. But otherwise, all of these other local governments I listed, they don't have any separation of the year, 6 months on, 6 months off. And quite frankly, a lot of them have an 8-foot leash law. So the dogs are allowed on the beach, but they must at all times be leashed, and some say an 8-foot leash.
I'm not seeing any more hands raised on this topic, and it's been as clear as the muddy surf. Chris Ambrosio, did you get enough of what you need to take a stab at rewriting?
I think I need it to be summarized because I heard a lot of different opinions, but I need a majority from the council, I guess, to move forward working with Riley and in the two sections, which are the leash law at large in public, and then there's the dogs on beaches leash law. And whichever way the council wants me to go with those two particular sections as a majority, I'll be glad to rework that as part of the overall working of the animal code.
Chris, I did have one other question. And my understanding is Volano Beach, for their pets, they do not have a leash law, that you can have your pet as long as they're under voice control, that they can be on the beach without a leash.
Okay.
I'm not saying, obviously, I'm not advocating for that at all. I'm just interested if you saw that.
Okay. I didn't look at Volano Beach. I'm pulling them up right now.
Okay.
While he's pulling that up, we'll take a shot at a summary here. Sounds like everyone's in favor of tightening up the ordinance to give Riley and the rest of the police department a little bit more enforcement authority. It sounds like there is consistency that if the dog is going to be on the beach, it must be on a leash. There probably needs to be some a little bit more detailed look from Chris with regards to dog in the water. But I think the consensus of what I'm hearing is if the dog's going to be on the beach, the dog has to be on a leash, period. And I'm seeing some heads nod with that, yes. It sounds like the big things that are maybe not in a consensus is what the length of the leash needs to be. And then the issue that Councilor Nichols brought up, which is regard to neighboring private properties, which Chris, I think we can probably take a look at that, especially from the perspective that if a private property owner goes onto another private property owner with their pet, that's truly a private property issue and doesn't really involve the city at that point. It's no different than your neighbor's tree overhanging your private property. That's a private property issue that the city is not necessarily involved with. So maybe we need to sculpt some language specifically to that, or I should say, focus on the public realm and other private properties that are open to the public as opposed to a true private property like a residence. But I think we've got a lot there, and we'll kick it over to Councilor Nichols. He's got his hand raised.
What are the current fines for not having your dog on a leash or violating our current code? And I understand that it's usually a warning initially. Riley?
Yeah, initially
Yeah.
it's a warning, and anything off leash, any of our ordinances actually are only $50.
And Councilor Golding?
One thing I'd like to add, and I wish there were some way that we could do this, because I know that Riley can't be everywhere all the time. We currently have our citizens on patrol, or we have, actually, it may just be any of our volunteers that take the ATV out on the beach and patrol the beach on a regular basis on the weekends. And I would guarantee that they probably, because they cannot issue citations, all they can do is educate. I would imagine that if they were to record the number of contacts that they make with people that have dogs on the beach and they shouldn't, or their dogs are off leash, that number would be pretty high. That we don't, if we could somehow, if those individuals, if those volunteers could issue a citation, we would probably see a lot more citations, because if they're on the beach a lot more, I just see it. I see it a lot. And this is no criticism to Riley or our police department, but they can't be there all the time. And unfortunately, people take advantage of it whenever there's not somebody around, and they let their dogs off leash. And then we've got issues with people that are afraid of the dogs, or kids, or the problem that we've had, we don't take our dog to the beach anymore because our dog has been bitten twice by off leash dogs. And it was because the dog ran up to her, and the owner every time said, "Oh, my dog's never done that before." Okay, well, great. That doesn't change anything, because now my dog's been bitten. We didn't call animal control because, unfortunately, the owner just took their dog and went away. But it's a problem, and it happens a lot. So, I mean, I'm trying to say that that if we had the ability to issue citations more often, we would probably see that we would have a higher number of citations.
Guys, excuse me for interrupting. Mike, I need to jump off. Mayor Curry's asked me to get some feedback from the other mayors. So I'm going to have to step out, but good
Charlie,
stuff. I appreciate it.
Charlie, can I say one thing? Just a question, because I know you're going into this meeting about it. I was on the beach yesterday, and I was at the park on the south end. The skate park was in full use yesterday. The basketball court, there was a full game going on, and just around the pier, I saw at least 100 people on blankets or chairs, not actively complying to what your ordinance is. I just want to let you know.
I appreciate it. The chief briefs Mike and I pretty regularly on it. And I know we're trying to walk the line of not making everybody punished for the actions of a few.
Absolutely.
But we're still working on it. So
yeah, yesterday was the bad day. It was just the day that I saw where it was pretty bad.
Okay. Thanks for the feedback. I'll see you guys later.
I need to get off here too.
And that brings us to Councilor Golding. Okay, I think Chris Ambrosio, I think you and I probably have enough information to work with here to put something together for council to consider. And then we can move forward with a further discussion once we have a draft.
Yeah, I have an answer. I think that Volano is under the St. Johns County ordinance. And that ordinance basically says that the dogs are allowed on private or public property, private property, including the beaches, if the dog is wearing a collar and is in the actual physical control of a person by restraint. And it says leash, cord, chain, or other appropriate means. That's the St. Johns County ordinance, and it includes the St. Johns County beaches.
Lori, I think you're frozen. Yep, there you go.
Chris, I'm sorry. I was just saying, I'll look for it, and if I find it, I'll let you know.
Okay.
I read it recently.
Okay.
Well, I think we've got enough information to work with on this particular item, and I don't see any more hands raised. So we'll try to wrap up this briefing at this point. It's 8:15. We did get a lot accomplished tonight. I appreciate the council bearing with us. Not easy doing a virtual briefing on such weighty topics. But again, thank you all for your participation in this tonight. If there's no closing questions or comments, looking to see if any hands pop up.
No, I'm good. I think my legs were asleep. We've been sitting here too long.
Okay, Ray, so we'll go ahead and call it an evening. Thank you all for your participation. We'll see you next Monday at our regular council meeting, virtual. Bye.
Okay, have a
Bye.
good